Please welcome to the TEDxSF stage, Dean Ornish.
It's great to be here today. I want to thank all the organizers for the chance to be here today, and particularly to Kunal. We tend to think of advances in medicine as being a new drug, a new laser, something really high-tech and expensive. And we often have a hard time believing that the simple choices that we make in our lives each day can make such a powerful difference, but they do. And in our work, we've been using very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art measures to prove the power of these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions. And since this is a conference on global health, I wanted to begin with that. And, many people don't know that more people are dying today in most parts of the world from heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic conditions than AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. And what's happening is it's drawing and diverting a lot of resources away from things that really do need drugs like AIDS, TB, and malaria to things that can be largely prevented and even reversed through simply changing diet and lifestyle. And what's happening is that countries are beginning to eat like us and live like us and all too often die like us. And the irony is that the diet that we found that can reverse and even prevent most of these conditions is the way that most of these countries were eating before they began to copy us. And so this is still the steep part of the curve, so intervention now can make a powerful difference. And what's personally sustainable is globally sustainable. What's good for you is good for the planet, and here's why. It's so easy to get overwhelmed with all the crises that are facing us now, the energy crisis, the global warming crisis, and the healthcare crisis. Like, what can I do as one person? But something as simple as what we choose to eat every day can make a difference. In the energy crisis, for example, 20% of the fossil fuel that we burn each day goes to make processed foods, which themselves are not so great for us. It takes 10 times more energy to eat higher on the food chain. When you're eating meat as opposed to a plant-based diet, it takes 10 times more resources to make that possible. Michael Pollan calculated that a quarter pounder with cheese takes 26 ounces of petroleum and leaves a 13-pound carbon footprint, which is equivalent to burning 7 pounds of coal. So the next time you're having a burger, imagine you're eating 7 pounds of coal in terms of its impact on the planet. So does that mean you should never eat meat? No. But even if you just have a meatless Monday, know that it's investing meaning in our actions, as Adam was saying before, is part of what makes them powerful and makes them sustainable. From a global warming crisis, many people are surprised to learn that livestock consumption accounts for more global warming than all forms of transportation combined. It's responsible for 18% of the total world greenhouse gas emissions compared to the entire global transportation system that's only responsible for 13% of that. Livestock is responsible for even more of the most toxic parts of the gases. Methane, for example, from cow farts is 23 times more toxic to the ozone layer than even carbon dioxide. And nitrous oxide is actually almost 300 times more toxic to the ozone layer than let me see if I can get this slide back up, than CO2. So these simple changes can make a powerful difference in not only how long we live, but also how well we live. From the standpoint of eating meat, again, what's good for the planet is also good for you, and what's bad for the planet is also bad for you. Eating a lot of meat, a number of studies have come out recently showing that red meat consumption increases total cardiac mortality, cancer mortality, and all-cause mortality. I like this cartoon. It's the cows going off to the slaughterhouse saying, "My only consolation is that by eating us, they're killing themselves." From a health crisis, 3/4 of the $2.8 trillion that we spend each year on healthcare costs, which are really, for the most part, sick care costs, are for chronic diseases that we can largely prevent or even reverse simply by changing diet and lifestyle. This is just one of many studies that showed in large numbers of people walking a half hour a day, not smoking, eating a reasonably healthy diet, and keeping a healthy weight prevented 93% of diabetes, 81% of heart attacks, and so on. And these are probably underestimations. It's probably even more than that. Well, how do we treat heart disease in this country? Well, we generally do it with a lot of drugs and surgery. And we spend a lot of money. We spent $60 billion on angioplasties and stents in the last year that we have data on them. And you say, well, that may be a lot of money, but think of all the lives it saves. Except that it doesn't. The latest randomized trials, a total of 8 of them, were reviewed recently in the Archives of Internal Medicine. They found that unless you're in the middle of having a heart attack, which the vast majority of people who get angioplasties and stents are not, they don't prolong life, they don't prevent heart attacks, they don't even reduce angina. And so the same is true for bypass surgery. Unless you're the 1 or 2% of people who have the most severe disease, they don't prolong life or prevent heart attacks either. That's $100 billion for 2 operations that are dangerous, invasive, expensive, and largely ineffective. Now, the cartoon says, I can operate or you can go on a strict diet. He says, well, you better operate because my insurance doesn't cover a strict diet. And that's been the problem, that with all this talk about evidence-based medicine, reimbursement is really a much more powerful determinant of how we practice medicine. Now, you find the same patterns with prostate cancer. The New England Journal of Medicine had 2 major studies, and they showed that only 1 out of 49 men who is treated for prostate cancer with surgery or radiation actually lives longer because of it. The other 48 tend to become either impotent or incontinent or both. So you take a guy who's often in the prime of life, in their 50s or 60s, find out they have early-stage prostate cancer, scare the hell out of them. They end up having an operation that doesn't really help them, but it maims them in the most personal ways. Now they're wearing diapers and can't have sex for no benefit. But the alternative is to say, well, let's just do watchful waiting. Let's just wait under a sword of Damocles for something bad to happen. And that's not very good. And so the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recently recommended maybe we shouldn't even screen men for prostate cancer because it's too hard to know that you have it and, quote, not do anything about it. But here again, there's a third alternative. As I'll show you, when you change your diet and lifestyle, you can slow, stop, or reverse the progression of early-stage prostate cancer without having to do that. Now, diabetes is another issue. Type 2 diabetes is a global epidemic. It's a pandemic. Already, a third of Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic. In the next 8 years, it's estimated to be half of Americans at a cost of $3.3 trillion, clearly not sustainable. Now, it turns out that lifestyle changes are actually better than drugs at preventing diabetes. This was a major study that was in the New England Journal 10 years ago, and it showed that lifestyle actually worked better than a drug to prevent diabetes. But lifestyle changes are also better than drugs at treating diabetes. This was in the New England Journal a year and a half ago. They had 2 drugs to lower blood sugar, and they found that it didn't work nearly as well to prevent the complications of diabetes as doing it through lifestyle. And the complications of diabetes are pretty awful. You know, heart attacks, strokes, amputations, blindness, kidney failure, and so on. But if you get someone's blood sugar down through diet and lifestyle, you can prevent all of these complications, both the human costs as well as the economic costs. And my colleagues and I at the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute have trained about 55 hospitals and clinics around the country, including 24 in West Virginia, Nebraska, and Pennsylvania. And we found that in looking at large numbers of these patients, we could get their blood sugar down to a level that we can prevent all these costs and complications simply by changing diet and lifestyle, and at a fraction of the costs, and the only side effects are good ones. So what are we doing? Well, it's what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, just walking a half-hour a day, and how much love and intimacy and social support we have. But it really goes back to a very radical concept, radical in the sense of getting to the root of something, which is what is the cause? And we spend so much time in medicine mopping up the floor around the sink that's overflowing without also turning off the faucet. And it's a simple idea, but it's a powerful one. Because if we can treat the cause, what we find, the cause, by the way, are the lifestyle choices that we make each day for the most part. And if we can make different choices, otherwise, the doctor says, take these cholesterol-lowering drugs, take these blood pressure pills, take these pills for lowering your blood sugar. And how long do I have to take them? You have to take them forever. It's like, how long do I have to keep mopping up the floor? Well, forever. Well, why don't we just turn off the faucet? Why don't we treat the underlying cause? And then when we do that, we find that our bodies have a remarkable capacity in most cases to begin healing, and much more quickly than we had once realized, because these biological mechanisms are exquisitely sensitive and highly dynamic. And it's not just lifestyle as prevention, but it's also lifestyle as treatment. Now, I began doing this work 35 years ago when I was a medical student, and I took 10 men and women with bad heart disease, put them in a hotel for a month, and we used what was then a new test called thallium to measure blood flow. And you can see around 10 o'clock there in the upper left, there's a black area where their blood flow should be going. A month later, in the same patient, in the same area, you can see there's much more blood going there. But we only had 10 patients. There was no control group. So I went back to school, finished medical school, and before starting my internship, did a second study. This time we had a randomized control group for comparison. And we found that the people who made these changes got better. The people who didn't got worse. The differences were highly significant. And we published that in the Journal of the AMA. Went to Boston, finished my medical training, moved to San Francisco in 1984, began the Lifestyle Heart Trial, and we used quantitative arteriography to measure the blockages. And you can see in the upper left where the arrow is, there's a narrowing in one of the main arteries that feeds the heart because it's clogged. Just a year later, it's wider. And because the blood flow is a fourth power function of the diameter, the actual blood to the heart was increased by 200 to 300%, which we measured using what are called cardiac PET scans. The lower left picture is the beginning. Blue and black is no blood flow. A year later, in the lower right, it's orange and white is maximal blood flow. You can see these are dramatic changes. And what we found overall is that the control group, who was making more moderate changes, got worse after 1 year and even worse after 5 years. That's what usually happens. But we found instead of getting worse and worse, these patients actually showed some reversal after 1 year and even more after 5 years. This is the first time that was shown. Now, to put a human face on this, I just want to show you a 1-minute clip from a new documentary called Escape Fire that came out last month in theaters around the country. It's available on iTunes and Amazon and so on. And the filmmakers want this to be to medicine what an inconvenient truth was to global warming. So take a look.
25 years ago, I had 5 restaurants in San Francisco. It was a great life. I smoked 6 cigars a day, 10 cups of coffee, a lot of wine. It was wonderful. And I had a massive heart attack. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I could hardly just about walk 3 steps, and I'd have to stop and rest. I was popping 20 or 30 nitriles a day. But then Dean Ornish was starting his program to see if you can reverse heart disease through lifestyle change. And he went to my doctor and asked if he could approach me. He told Dean, "How long is the program?" So he said it was a year. And my doctor told him he wouldn't recommend taking me because he didn't think I would live the year. So he figured I was going to die because I was in such bad shape. And now, 25 years later, and I'm in pretty good shape.
His doctor, unfortunately, passed away in the meantime. But you know, this is a guy who hasn't had chest pain now in 25 years, who literally couldn't walk across the street. That's why I'm so passionate about doing this work. This is the kind of thing that we see all the time in thousands and thousands of patients. So we wondered if maybe this could help prostate cancer as well. So we did a study in collaboration with Dr. Peter Carroll, who's the chair of urology here at UCSF, and the late Dr. Bill Fair, who at the time was the chair of urology at Sloan Kettering in New York. And we took men who had biopsy-proven prostate cancer, but who had elected not to be treated for reasons unrelated to the study, so that we could then divide them randomly into 2 groups, ask one group to make these lifestyle changes but not the other, and see what happened without being confounded by the usual chemo and radiation and surgery. And we found that the PSA levels, a marker for prostate cancer, went up or got worse in the group that didn't change, went down or got better in the group that did, and these differences were highly significant. And they were in direct proportion to the degree of change in lifestyle, which is the same we found in heart disease. The more people change, the more they improve. We looked at the effects of when we added their serum to a standard line of prostate tumor cells growing in tissue culture, the tumor growth was inhibited 70% versus 9%. And in one of the coolest slides, the more people changed their lifestyle, the more it directly inhibited the growth of prostate tumors growing in tissue culture. And through John Kerhanowicz's lab here at UCSF, we did MR spectroscopy showing the tumor activity, shown in red here, was diminishing in this patient after a year, as well as the PSA going down. So taken as a whole, this is really the first and still the only randomized trial showing that the progression of men with early-stage prostate cancer can be slowed and stopped and often even reversed simply by making changes in diet and lifestyle. So we wondered what some of the mechanisms might be to help explain that, and we found that gene expression was changed in over 500 genes in just 3 months. In effect, turning on or upregulating the good genes that protect us, downregulating the bad genes that cause inflammation and oxidative stress, and also the RAS oncogenes that promote prostate, breast, and colon cancer were downregulated or turned off, hundreds of them in just 3 months. And this is what's called a heat map. You can see on the right are the oncogenes, and red is mostly turned on. 3 months later, green is mostly turned off. It's amazingly powerful. We did a study with Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering telomerase, which is an enzyme that repairs and lengthens damaged telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that control how long we live, and also Dr. Lissa Epel, who'll be presenting later today. And what we found was that the telomerase could increase by 30% in just 3 months. And no study has shown that. And we're about to publish the 5-year follow-up and show that the telomeres themselves actually get longer when you make these changes. And this will be the first study to show that as well. If this was a new drug that could lengthen your telomeres, it'd be a multi-billion drug, billion-dollar drug overnight. But it's the same lifestyle changes that do all these things. It's not like there's one for diabetes, another one for heart disease, and so on. And we found, again, the more lifestyle changes people made, the longer their telomeres got. We also found that angiogenesis changes. This is the first study to show that. We found that we could downregulate VEGF, which tumors secrete to cause blood vessels to grow and feed them. Drugs like Avastin and Nexavar inhibit VEGF, but it costs $100,000 a year per person to take. This is, again, for free. It's just the same lifestyle changes. So the more we look, the more mechanisms we can invoke to explain why these changes are so powerful and why they make such a great difference. So our genes are a predisposition, but our genes are not our fate. I find that very empowering. We also found that this was not only medically effective, but also cost-effective. Mutual of Omaha found they saved $30,000 per patient in the first year. Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield found they could cut their costs by 50% in the first year and by an additional 20 to 30% in years 2 and 3. And finally, a year and a half ago, after 16 years of review, Medicare agreed to cover our program, which was a real game changer because, again, reimbursement is such a primary determinant of medical practice. If you change reimbursement, you change medical practice and even medical education. So we're in the process now of training hospitals and clinics and sites around the country. If you're interested in learning more about our work, go to our website, or if you're interested in being trained in this. And our goal is to we train a team of 6 people, a doctor, a nurse, a stress management specialist, essentially a yoga and meditation teacher, an exercise physiologist, a dietitian, and a psychologist who work together as a team with the doctor as quarterback. And it enables us to reclaim our role as healers and not simply as technicians. Vinod Khosla, who'll be speaking later today, was quoted in a very controversial statement that, we doctors are going to get replaced by an iPhone app before too long. And if all we are just a collection of algorithms, then that's true. But we're more than that, and it allows us to get re-enchanted with medicine and to reclaim our role as healers and not just technicians. We trained the St. Vincent de Paul homeless shelter here in San Francisco. There are over 20,000 patients who've now gone through our clinic in the last year and a half there. And now with the Medicare reimbursement, it's financially stable, and we can now clone this around the country without needing ongoing philanthropy to support that. But the other big epidemic, besides heart disease and obesity and diabetes, is depression and loneliness. And study after study have shown that people who feel lonely and depressed are many times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. We found we could cut depression scores in half simply by changing diet and lifestyle, comparable or even better than what you get with antidepressants. And because there's been a breakdown in the social networks that used to give us a sense of connection and community. Many people don't have a job that feels secure, a neighborhood where you have several generations of neighbors living together, an extended family, or even a nuclear family that you see regularly. And we all know that these things affect the quality of our lives, but they actually affect our survival. And, Nick Christakis' work found that these social networks are so powerful that if your friends are obese, you're 45% more likely to be obese. If your friends' friends are obese, 25%. If your friends' friends are obese, even 10%, even if you've never met them. And you can see this with other behaviors as well. That's how powerful these are. So the last thing that I want to say is that anything that creates a sense of trust leads to intimacy, leads to healing and meaning. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole, yoga, to yoke, to unite, to bring together. These are old ideas that we're rediscovering. And you find this as part of all spiritual traditions, altruism, compassion, forgiveness, and love, not to get some external reward in the next lifetime, but that's what frees us from our isolation and our depression and our suffering here and now. My dad died a few months ago. My mom had a stroke, a debilitating stroke shortly thereafter. My dog of 14 years got bit on the nose by a rattlesnake. This is on the last few months and died. Life is short and life is precious. And what I'm most interested in is not simply unclogging arteries or showing all these kinds of things, as interesting as they are, because we're all going to die. The mortality rate is still, 100%. It's 1 per person. I got profoundly and suicidally depressed when I was in college. That was my doorway into this area. For someone else, it might be a heart attack or a stroke. But you know, change is hard, as Adam mentioned earlier. But when you're in enough pain, suddenly the idea of change becomes more interesting. And what I'm most passionate about and what I find most interesting is how we can use the experience of suffering as a doorway for transforming our lives and finding meaning. And then we can often get curing, but we can always get healing. Thank you so much.